morning. My name is Tim McConnell. I'm an organization design consultant with Grahall. This morning we're going to talk about organization design as a concept. We're going to review a variety of aspects of organization design, including what it is, what it's all about, what the key concepts are, how it works, etc. So we divided this program into 3 sections, as you can see here. So 3 units. Unit 1 is introduction. We're going to define an organization. We're a big believer in defining our terms, if you will. So if I'm using the same words, it's important that you understand that you're using the same words as well. What are the components of an organization? We're going to talk about organization design as a concept, look at some of the elements. In Unit 2, we're going to get back into key concepts in terms of criteria, dimensions, etc. So Unit 2 is probably the most technical part of what we're going to look at. Unit 3 then, we'll get into organizational analysis. So you do organization design, if you will, through analysis and review. We'll look at some of the symptoms of ineffective organization design, why organizations should and don't redesign, and the steps in the process. So that's our agenda. So let's get going. So Unit 1, introduction, as we talked about. Questions for you. Is the organization of your business well designed? So how do you know? So you all have businesses, you all have organizations, they all have structures, etc. Think of it as the design of your house. How do you know that your business is well designed? What does a well-designed organization look like? How does it feel to work there? How is it different than a poorly designed organization? This is what we're going to look at. So let's start off by defining our terms. Our first major term, obviously, is what is an organization. An organization is not a building. It's the people in the building. It's how the people interact with each other, how they play with each other, how they focus on achieving a common goal. So at its most basic level, an organization is a group of people who work together. We work together. What do we share? We have a shared vision. We have a shared mission. We know where we're going. We know why we want to get there. We share our values and culture, and we share our beliefs. It's a social arrangement where, as I said, we're going after collective goals. We're controlling and managing our own performance, managing our own results, etc. It's also from a systems perspective, an organization is a dynamic and open social system. We interact with each other internally. We interact with our environment. We draw input from external sources. We provide value at the end of the day to external clients or stakeholders. So we change inputs into outputs. That, in a nutshell, is what an organization is. Components of an organization, different parts, if you will. We have, as I mentioned, vision, mission, values, and beliefs. We can design an organization into tasks that are done by people using core work processes and enabling processes, and we'll define the differences between those two a bit later. And every organization, as you know, has its own culture. So let's look at each one of those then, mission and vision. So core components, the core component, as I mentioned, is its purpose. So why do you exist? Every organization exists to move a business or program goal forward. So the most important part of any organization is its mission and its vision. It's the raison d'etre, if you will. Why does it exist? Businesses or organizations, obviously, they organize themselves in a way to increase their capacity, to achieve the goal of the organization, their contract with the customer, the stakeholder, to earn a profit, whatever. But everyone has a goal. Work tasks, these are things that people do. A job, really, if you think about it, a job is nothing more than a group of tasks that someone has put together that says, okay, this person is going to do this series of tasks in this order, following processes on any given day. That's really all a job is. A task is a piece of work assigned as part of duties. And this is what we're doing in our organization. We've got individuals and groups. People are organized into teams, if you will. We've got units, structures, departments, etc. Every organization, if you look at an organization chart on paper, is comprised of this. The structure of the group doesn't necessarily equal the design of the organization, but obviously they're closely related. The next one is core work processes. So how work is done. You could have a process that looks at processing payroll, for example, from getting input on timesheets, that how many hours someone has worked in a given week. How does that translate into pay? What is the net pay calculation? How much of it is remitted back to the government for taxes, etc. That whole string of tasks, if you will, is a business process. Core work processes are ones that are sanctioned by the organization, that are core to the business of the organization. If we're a manufacturing company and we're producing widgets, the widget designers, if you will, are a core process and a core part of the business. The people that manufacture the widgets are core. The people that market and sell the widgets are core. The people that deliver the widget to the client are core, etc. What would be enabling or supporting is things like HR, finance, IT. They are enabling the purpose of this manufacturing company in selling, if you will, and designing its widgets. Another part of it is because we're dealing with people. It's not just boxes on the organization chart. We're dealing with people here. Is culture. Culture is the way we do things around here. It's the way it feels. Quite often you don't realize that you've got culture in an organization until you go to a different organization, and then you say, "Hey, things feel weird around here. This is different." And they do things differently. They walk and talk differently. They interact with other people differently. They they deal with their supervisors differently. Management treats people differently. Organizations can have very, very different cultures. So we're defining culture here as deeply rooted beliefs and norms shared by everyone in the organization. Another way of looking at it is personality. It's the personality of an organization. If you have 10 people, we all have 10 different personalities. If you have 10 organizations, then they will have 10 different personalities or cultures. So as I said, it's the way we do things around here. You'll find as well that we have subcultures. Every department in an organization will have its own culture. We're human resources consultants. Last summer we went to a number of different clients, and we had an intern working with us in the summertime. And we went and talked to the CEOs of a couple of organizations and had a conversation, and the intern was sitting there watching, etc., as part of her learning and development program. A week later, we went to another organization and we talked to their HR people. And at the end of the meeting, outside in the parking lot, the intern says, "Tim, you talked to those people completely differently, the HR people, than you did the CEO, the executives." And I hadn't really thought about that because I just did it automatically. So when I was dealing with members of my own tribe, if you will, I automatically reviewed it, changed into a different attitude, a different approach. I talked HR lingo, which I would never do with an executive, etc., because I was in a different culture. IT people certainly have their own culture. Finance people absolutely have their own culture. If you wanted to assess your culture, you would ask the question, if you took 10 people walking by in the HR department and said, "Okay, answer these questions. What words would they use to describe the organization? What's really important around here? Who gets promoted or not? What behaviors get rewarded or are punished? Who fits in and who doesn't?" There's a saying in HR that people get hired for their resume and fired for their personality. So you ask, well, 2 months out, especially new people, so 2 months after someone started, they're asked to leave the organization, that they're terminated, and you ask, well, why? And quite often it's not because of bad performance or anything. It's because, quote, they didn't fit in. Well, what does that mean? How do you measure that? But that's what culture is all about. So we need to define our terms. Obviously, our key term is organization design. What is organization design? At the end of the day, it's the way an organization is structured to comply with a strategic plan. So we have an organization. What does it look like? What are the functions that are performed within the organization? What are the jobs that we've created in order to, as it says here, to comply with our strategic plan, to align ourselves with our business goals? So an organization design process is there to improve the probability that an organization will be successful. This is why the organization exists, is to be successful. If it's an organization redesign, we're reshaping the structure and positions to better meet our business goals. So organization design is a process. It's a formal guided process for integrating people, business processes, information, technology, structures, jobs, etc., bringing all of these things together so that we have a structure, a model that, again, is aligned to achieve our business results. Quite often we use the acronym OD to talk about org design, but someone else uses the same acronym, and that's the organization development people. So we quite often get asked, Tim, when you say OD, don't you mean org development? And some people may mean org development. In our case, we mean org design. So what the heck is the difference? Two ways of looking at it. Org development is about people, and org design is about boxes on the org chart. Org design is hard, if you will. So it's the desks in the organization, and org development is soft because it's about people. So we do try not to confuse the two. Org development, as I said, deals with the people side of business performance. When you look at org development, people, our functions, our consultants, and say, okay, what do they do? We're looking at things like leadership, team dynamics, organizational effectiveness. Organization development consultants, for example, will help leaders with coaching, with communication strategies, with management of change, etc. So hard versus soft. So same acronym OD, but we're focusing obviously on organization design. Back to our elements. This is one way of looking at it. We've got functions and people. On the business side, we've got the external environment. You're obviously interacting as part of that, so that has to be kept in mind at all times. We've got the organization, the raison d'etre, as I mentioned, their mission, their vision. Why do we exist? The corporate strategy is how we're going to implement the objective of the organization. What are the major functions and structures that we need to implement the corporate strategy? And again, these need to be aligned. What is the organizational model in that relates to that in terms of jobs and functions? And then operationally, what are the business plans that every department would have in order to operate and get things going? From an HR perspective, so the blue is structure and business. The red boxes are the people side of things. We have an HR strategy. Ideally, just to get into HR for a second, every organization needs an HR strategy as part of its business plan. So unless you're a factory full of robots, you're running your business with people. And they need to be managed. So you need an overall approach to how a people strategy, if you will, in terms of how you're managing this. You need to be hiring and recruiting and staffing for key skills. You're doing organization design to set up your positions that you're then staffing for. Key phrase in HR is attract, retain, and motivate. So we want to attract the right people. We want to keep them. So you want to keep turnover low. And you want people motivated so they're excited about coming into work every day. And then you need the rules of engagement. What are your HR policies, practices, and processes? We call this HR PP&P or P cubed. That rules of engagement, as I said, so everyone knows what's going on, et cetera, what the rules are, what I can do, what I can't do, how do I get, what are the benefits, all of these different things. So let's go back to organization design and look at requirements. A key phrase that you've probably heard before is form follows function. So when I talk about the business of the organization and aligning the structure of the organization to that what we're really saying is form follows function. So it's meeting the purpose of the organization. You need to fit your environment. I'm not going to read through all these things, but all of these are requirements that an organization structure should have. So that's Unit 1. That's our introduction. In Unit 2, we're going to look at key concepts of organization design. We're going to look at something called a business model. We're going to look at design criteria, etc. Good morning. Now we're going to move to Unit 2 of our overall introductory course on organization design. In Unit 1, we provided an overview of some of the key elements and concepts of organization design. In Unit 2, we're going to drill down a bit into some of the more technical parts of the concepts of organization design. We're going to look at things like business model, the key elements of an organizational model itself, design criteria for your organization structure, principles of good design, so things you should do, things you shouldn't do, why you want a good design, so a well-designed organization structure. We're going to look at some of the dimensions of an organization. There's different ways of slicing and dicing, if you will, or looking at this table this way is one way of looking at it, and looking at this table from a different direction, same table, but I have a different view of it. And so we're going to apply that to organizations. As I said, we're going to look at types of organization structures and things you should consider when you're designing an organization structure. So the first thing then at the top of our list is a business model. We call this a conceptual business model. In our business, when we do organization design consulting, we walk in, we learn the organization, we learn it through what we call paper and people. So paper is also things that are written down in the organization in terms of business strategy, plans, etc., job descriptions even. And people is we interview stakeholders, executives, etc., to learn the business. We then go back and we look at the website, etc. We then go back and produce this. So this is a generic version. We produce a real business model for an organization. Some clients will say at the beginning, Tim, I don't want this. This is, it's going to be too long and it's a waste of time, etc. And we say, well, even if you don't want it, we're going to do it anyway because we need this for our own sanity, for our own understanding of your organization. Because we can take any business and boil it all down to one piece of paper. So we do this, and I'll explain it in a second. We find that even the clients that didn't want it at the beginning like it at the end because it summarizes their entire business on one piece of paper. It's also a way for us to validate that we're understanding your business. If we're not, then we can correct it. So sometimes we go through a number of iterations, if you will, as we develop this. But in every organization, you've got input, process, and output. So what's coming in? It can be people, information, money. It's usually all three, etc. What are the processes that you do in your organization, your key business processes? And then what is the result, which comes back to why your organization exists in the first place. So we always start at the high end with the corporate strategy. We ask questions such as, who are your customers, your clients? What is your value proposition to them? So this is a private sector term, customers. People are paying for your product or your service. Even in the public sector or for a nonprofit organization, we wouldn't use the word customers. We could say clients or stakeholders or users, etc., etc. But the concepts apply. What is the value proposition to them? Why do you exist? Why are they your users, your customers, your stakeholders? What are they receiving from you? How are you organized to deliver it? And what returns can you expect and your clients and stakeholders expect for what you're doing? So we've got things that are coming into the organization, your stakeholders, your client needs, etc. You've got a value proposition in the organization. Every single organization and person, for that matter, should have a value proposition. Why do you exist? Why are you here? Why should I interact with you? What am I going to get out of it? We've got things going on in the organization, etc., the processes, and then we've got the dollar value at the end, which could not just be business results, but it could be program results in your organization. That's one way of looking at an organization, is through a conceptual business model. As I said, input, process, output. Another way is looking at it this way, in terms of key elements. So we have an organization model in the middle. We have your business strategy. These are all words we've used before. You have the systems in place to run the organization, which are related to your business processes. You've got people and their skills working, etc. These are all things that we need to keep in mind when we design an organization, which is why they're on this chart. When we go through an organization design project, we call it organization analysis and review. We'll, at the very beginning of that process, or frankly after we've done the conceptual business model, we'll say, okay, at the end of the day, we're going to have a redesigned organization structure. It may be very much redesigned or maybe very little redesigned, depending on what's going on here, but there will be something at the end of the day, obviously. But quite often you get caught up in the momentum and the excitement and what's going on, etc. So at the very beginning, we stand back and say, okay, at the end of the day, what should this organization look like? No matter whether it looks like this or like that or like this, etc. It should always meet our design criteria. So we set these up with clients. So it's a checklist of outcomes or goals that we want to accomplish. We use it to test suggestions, etc., to say, okay, do they meet the design criteria? And we would only change design criteria at the end very carefully. So once they're set in place, they're very important to not overlook. So other principles of organization design is, organization at the end of the day, is it going to operate efficiently? Is it going to be effective? Are we going to make the right use of technology? Are we going to be offering quality services and products to our organization? Is cycle time important? How flexible do we need to be? To what extent is or degree is employee initiative a factor, etc.? These are all things to be considered. So you may be saying, okay, so what, Tim? I've got my organization, everything's working fine, etc. Why would I want to change? There are things that sort of benefits of good organization design. So if your organization is designed well, or you're going through a project to redesign your organization, what are things you want to consider? What are things that, at the end of the day, we should have achieved these goals? So these goals include employee satisfaction. If your employees aren't happy, then you've got issues. Your customers and stakeholders have to be satisfied. Obviously, financial performance is important, either in terms of business results, making a profit, or even in a nonprofit organization. Financial performance is still a factor. You've got to be meeting your budgets, etc., and not losing money. Is competitive advantage a factor? It certainly isn't in the private sector. Communications are important, productivity is important, effectiveness. So you could ask yourself, in my organization, do I have all of these things? Do they apply to what we're doing? If they don't, then why not? And you could ask the question, okay, is that a problem or not? So now we're going to get into some of the concepts of the structure of organization design. We can look at, remember I said I can look at my table from this way and I can look at my table from that way. We can look at an organization in these ways. So we've got division of labor. You could have different departments or specializations. We could have departments, so the HR people, all the people that do the HR work are in the HR department. That's not necessarily true, but it's a good starting point. All the people that do finance work are in the finance department. What is our coordination and control mechanism? Is there a chain of command? What are the spans of control? Span of control is basically how many people a supervisor supervises. If I'm a supervisor and I have 10 people, if they're all doing exactly the same job, that's relatively easy for me to supervise. If they're doing 10 different jobs and 10 different functions, then that's a lot harder. Maybe 10 is too many. So we've got authority and responsibility, line activities. Line activities are those that are directly related to the business, so they're the core processes. And staff activities, it doesn't mean people in this concept. It means, in this context, it means support functions. And then how were our jobs designed? Which leads us to this point. We have structure and we have design. So what is an organization structure? It's the way in which the parts of an organization are arranged and how they relate to one another. So when we do these consulting projects on organization design, we do the conceptual business model, we then break out the organization into core functions. So, okay, these are the things that are being done. And we view them as building blocks. So if you picture building blocks here, I've got this organization and it's set up this way, etc. If I'm using that block approach, I can take it apart. I can knock it down. I could take the organization, the blocks, etc., and move them around, and then build a new organization structure, putting the blocks together in a different way. That's essentially what we're doing here. So how are the blocks, the functions in your organization related to each other? Design is conceptually how our jobs are defined, what spans of control, as I mentioned, exist, etc. So there is a technical difference between structure and design. There's different types of structures. And we're going to actually get into these in a fair bit of detail. We have functional structures, structures that are organized around products or services. We have a matrix structure, which we're seeing more and more. We have structures that are built around a business process, and we have virtual networks. So in functional structures, this is what you would think of as traditional. So they're hierarchical. It's a pyramid structure. The boss is at the top, and then there's vice presidents below the boss, and then each vice president has directors reporting to them. And so we have one job at the top, and then more people as we go down the organization. So it's a typical pyramid. Units traditionally could include marketing, finance, operations, etc. A key aspect is that the specialists are working together. So the finance folks are with the finance people, the engineers are all together, etc. So similar resources are centralized. Another component is the fact that your managers know the area they're in charge of. So the manager of engineering is obviously an engineering expert. The manager of HR is obviously an HR expert, etc. Career pathing in the organization is by function. So the engineers come in and they move through the organization over time in their career path, from junior engineer to intermediate to senior to different areas of specialization. And that's how the organization is run. Some of the difficulties is that how is coordinating. How do I coordinate HR with engineering, with operations, etc.? Do all of these different departments and sections play well with each other? You've heard the term silos. This is what happens here is that these, in a poorly designed organization, is that these departments don't talk to each other. So the sales and marketing people may not talk to the engineering people, etc. So as I said, silos. So that's what we mean by coordination is difficult. So that's a functional structure. This is what a functional structure would look like. So we have the CEO, we have the different departments, marketing, finance, human resources, etc. Our next type of structure is product and service. So this is different. We're not organized by engineering, etc. We may be organized in a different way by projects. So resources and services that are similar to the organization are grouped together. Job evaluation committee, a certain project, etc. We've got the best way to look at this is it's organized around a specific product or service. I used to work for a food company. Their clients were complaining that, that's an interesting question. Who are the clients of a food company? And it was a consumer products food company. They decided, you know what? Our client is not the person buying groceries in the store. Our client is the grocery store itself, and more importantly, the chains of grocery stores. And the chains of grocery stores were complaining and saying, you know what, if I'm the manager of this store in this chain, etc., I'm dealing with the marketing person from my company one day, and somebody else from delivering of the product the next day, and then the invoice comes on the third day, and it doesn't match up what got delivered or what was sold to me by the the marketing person, the salesperson, and you're not coordinated. So this company, we completely redesigned so that we put everyone together in a team, basically account management, and we said, okay, everyone that is dealing with this Loblaws or this big chain, we're going to have a team, and Loblaws only it's called one-stop shopping, if you will. Loblaws only deals with one person in our organization, or one group, and so they deal with someone. So basically, everyone talks to each other: the merchandising people, the sales people, the marketing people, the delivery people, the finance people. We're all organized in this way to service the client. So our key focus in that example was on the service delivered to that client. So a picture. So instead of having marketing, finance, and HR separate, as we had in the functional structure, we're organized by service line. So we have marketing, finance, and HR people in product or service number one, and the same in the other service areas. A matrix structure is a combination of function and service, where individuals report to a function head or a product service head. It can get quite complex. So a way to look at it is to say that we've got our engineering group, etc. They may be divided geographically. So we have our engineering group in Canada and our engineering group in the United States, and they're different. We've got then corporate HR, who may be at headquarters, or, and this is the best way to look at it, people from corporate HR and IT and finance have two bosses. They're serving two masters. One is the corporate director of HR, director of finance. The second is the plant manager where they're at, etc. So there's a dual reporting relationship. So matrix structure is both vertical and hierarchical, and horizontal, which we'll show you in a second. So reporting relationships can be quite complex because you can ask the question, who's my boss? In fact, one of the functions of a poorly designed organization is having too many bosses. We call it multiple boss syndrome. But there are benefits of operating this way. So this is what a matrix structure would look like. So that was our third type of structure. The fourth one is process, where our teams are organized around workflow, around core business processes. So the structure of our organization is determined by the process itself, which can be both core and support. So what a process structure is driven by the way an organization organizes around different streams. For example, payroll process. If you're a municipal government, in the winter, you've got a snow removal process. In a high-tech company, you would have a product development process, etc. So the organization is focused around the process. And that's what that might look like. A virtual network then is our last kind of structure. It's the most recent one. It's where a cluster of different departments are electronically and virtually connected. We're using the web to exchange information and complex tasks. So employees can be located in a wide geographical area. So that's what that would look like. We've got our headquarters, and these different functions may be organized and structured virtually, as opposed to in the other ways we talked about. So other things to consider: is your organization flat or tall? What do we mean by that? A flat organization structure would have very few management levels. So management levels are, what's the distance, or how many layers, if there will, from the CEO to the lowest person in the organization? If you counted all those, how many are there? If there are very few, maybe only 3 or 4, that would be a flat structure. If there are 10 or 15, that would be a tall structure. If you mapped it out, it would literally be tall on the page. There's pros and cons with each one. In a flat organization, response time can be faster because there's less people involved in making decisions. Employees feel more in touch with the thinking of top management because they're not so far away that we never see them or even know who they are. There's less management to get in the way, if you will, in terms of decision making. There are downsides. There's fewer opportunities for promotion, obviously. In a tall organization, communication tends to be slower and less accurate. Decisions take longer. There's more coordination involved. Employees lose touch with senior management. The supervisory load will be different. There's certainly more opportunities for promotion. So there's pros and cons to each one. You may say, yes, you know what, we should be flat here, etc., but that may not be scalable as your organization grows, adds more products, more geographical areas, etc. You're just going to have to start adding layers to make it all work. So not one size fits all. It's what's appropriate for your organization today, which could be different a year from now. Other things to consider: span of control, I mentioned earlier. How many people do I supervise? It depends on the type of work people are doing, but what's appropriate in your organization. So there's pros and cons on each one. It depends on the department, on the functions, on who's doing what. Another aspect, and this is our last point in this unit, is centralization versus decentralization. So centralization is all the decisions are made at headquarters. And if there are regions or other parts of the organization, we simply say, hey, management decided this, go off and do that, and don't ask any questions. In a decentralized organization, decisions are made geographically elsewhere or in other functions, not just headquarters. So again, there's pros and cons. What we see in government, interestingly, is that this is not black versus white. This is a pendulum. So people come along and say, oh, we need to centralize because those regions are out there, they're doing their own thing, there's no coordination, and we need to get our act together, and the only way to do that is to make all the decisions at headquarters. So fine, so we do that. 5 years later, the regions are complaining headquarters are too strict, they don't understand what things are like locally, and we need more autonomy to make decisions locally, so they start decentralizing. So the pendulum swings from centralized to decentralized. 5 years after that, same problems exist, as I mentioned at the beginning, about decentralization, and we swing back again. So there's no right answer. It's a question of what is appropriate, as I said, for your organization right now. And that concludes our second unit. Good morning. Welcome to part 3 of our course on organizational design. What we're going to look at here in unit 3 is organizational analysis and review. So we're going to look at the process around that. So we've talked about some of the core concepts and elements around organization design. What we're going to do now is apply this in real life to reviewing, analyzing, and assessing your organization and seeing whether or not it can be changed to improve how you accomplish your business goals. things we're going to look at are symptoms of ineffective organization design. I asked you in Module 1, I said, is your organization well designed, and how do you know? Or how do you not know? And so what are the things to look for in assessing your organization? We're going to look at why you might wish to redesign your organization structure, why organizations don't, and a lot choose not to. There's a lot of pushback quite often for managers as to why we should not do this, etc. So we'll address those, and then we'll look at the process itself. How does one actually do or accomplish organizational analysis? So symptoms. So you could look at your organization and say, are these aspects, these symptoms present in my organization? Do you have silos? Is there a lack of inter-office coordination? So you may have business processes that cross the organization or not, that go from one department to another, but do your departments talk to each other? Does everybody in one department that liaises with another department do that effectively, and they know the right people, they know how to get things done, and there's just open communication to the extent necessary? Does that exist, or are we closeted in our own little place, and I don't talk to those people down there because they're those people down there, and we're our people here, and they're different, and I don't want to talk to them? So, which we could often see, frankly. In fact, it gets worse. We see excessive or friction. You could argue that we don't need the word excessive here, that any friction is bad, because you're all a team. You're all in your organization trying to accomplish your business goals, etc. So, and you need to be working with each other effectively. So, but do you have friction and conflict among internal groups? We see this quite often. So basically, the children are not playing well with each other. Unclear roles. Does everybody know what their job is? You may think they do. If we ask the next 5 people walking by here, what's your job? What is the goal of the organization? What is the goal of your department? Where do you fit in here? What is your role, etc.? Could everybody answer that question clearly? And would it be consistent if I asked people in the same department, for example? Quite often people aren't quite clear what their role is. You may have pay compression or inversion between supervisors and highest paid subordinates because of overtime pay. We see that in municipal governments quite often. Are your resources being used effectively? You could ask those same employees, is this organization, this business, this company getting the best value out of you in terms of your job, etc., and the value that you have to offer, what you can contribute to this organization? We see organizations where there's a mismatch, so it's back to the silos that we talked about, especially in annual cycles. So we walk into that organization in January, and one department is very busy and they're running around like crazy trying to meet deadlines, and that's their peak time of the year. And another department over here, it's not their peak time, and they're sitting around doing nothing. And they don't care that this other department is busy, or management is operating in silos, or if they realize, hey, you know what, this really doesn't make that much sense, why don't we borrow some of these folks over here? Well, I can't because they've not been cross-trained. They don't know how to do the function over here. 6 months later, these people are very busy, and these people over there are sitting around doing nothing, and they can't contribute for the same reasons. So that's what we mean by misused resources. Poor workflow. If you take a business process and you look at all the steps involved and where in the process the work goes. So something starts over here, then it goes over here. In a staffing process, for example, a position becomes vacant. The manager decides they're going to fill it. They go to HR. HR says, fill out this job requisition form. Then it gets approved, etc. Then they have to update the job description, prepare a job posting, advertise. So there's all these steps, as you know, in this process. But how often does HR touch that process? How often does it go back to the manager for approval when maybe it doesn't need to? Or it goes to an HR director for approval or something. So is your process designed so that you have all the necessary accountabilities, etc.? So we're not shortcutting that. But is it designed so that it operates as smoothly as possible or not? Reduce responsiveness to change. Well, we're doing this the same way we did it last year. Doesn't matter that the customers have changed, that the environment has changed, etc. I'm doing it the way I always did it. Well, is that effective or not? Are you getting the financial performance in your business that you want? Is your CFO happy? Are your stakeholders happy, etc., with your financial performance? Quite often we see a proliferation of extra organizational units. So we walk into your organization and there's projects over here, and because a need comes up to get something done and it doesn't necessarily fit into your organization structure, so how do we make it happen? We create a project. Well, if you do a project here, a project there, etc., maybe you need a department to run all those different projects if they're in similar areas. So that's a sign of ineffective organization design. High turnover, multiple boss syndrome we mentioned earlier. So these are all symptoms of ineffective organization design. So why would I want to redesign? Well, to fix those symptoms, first of all. Second, to be responsive to the market. There's external trends happening. There may be new markets, new competitors, depending on where you are. Some business sectors are change very fast, so they need to be very agile in responding to change. Other ones, so it's like a speedboat versus the Queen Mary. Other ones are big and slow and change less frequently. But what works for you and your organization in your sector and the environment that you work in. Cultural change. Some of these are catalysts. Growth. So the organization is successful, it's growing, you receive new venture capital funding, or in a nonprofit you may receive new funding from one of your donors, etc. And all of a sudden you need to decide, hey, how do we organize with this new money to accomplish these new goals, etc. Or the reverse happens, especially in the past several years, downsizing. So how do we reorganize for downsizing? What happens with mergers and acquisitions? How do you manage that? So these are all things that are reasons why you may want to change. One thing we see the most of is simply new leadership. So there's a new president, a new executive director. They walk in, they look around and say, hey, you know what? I don't like the way this organization is structured, and I'm going to change it. And meanwhile, the old boss never bothered. They were just used to it, etc. A new person coming in can see flaws, if you will, that their predecessor may not have seen, and that's just normal. So new leadership is quite often a catalyst for an organization design project. So all of these things are happening and we're not changing. So why not? Why don't organizations do this? So they're hanging on to shreds of hope that, it'll go away. This happened last year and it went away then. Why won't it go away again next time? So maybe it'll fix itself. There's all internal office politics going on. They don't know how it got to be so bad in the first place. It's not our organization's fault. It's the market. Certain executives have pet projects, pet programs, pet favorite ways of doing things that they don't want to change. It's too scary here. I mean, that's the unknown. I'm more comfortable with what I'm doing now, or we're simply not ready. Other pushbacks we see from organizations and from directors or managers. I'm too busy. I don't have time to do this change. Lack of appropriate business relevance. So it doesn't make sense in my world here. Other pushbacks, assessing a project too soon, having expectations for a project, an organization design project that are too high. So you're not realistic. Lack of support in staffing the project or in guiding the people doing the project. Management not wanting to relinquish control. Silos, as I mentioned. So lots of reasons why we don't redesign. If you do decide to redesign your organization, what approach should you follow? So number one, define the services that you want to deliver based on your organization goals and objectives. I used the word before, alignment. It's all about alignment. It's my favorite word, the A word, alignment. Are your structures and functions lined up to fully support and contribute and work with the strategic goals and priorities of your business? How do you define then an organization structure? So you want to define an organization structure to support the delivery of those services. Once you've done that, you need to define the types of jobs. So okay, we want to make widgets, and say okay, we need people to design widgets, we need people to manufacture them, we need people to sell them, we need people to deliver them, we need an accounting department to keep track of all the money. Those are my high level functions. So within manufacturing, what do I need? Within design, what jobs do I need? So I need designers, etc. What jobs do I need in HR to support this, etc. In every department, what jobs do we need to make that happen? So we view it as a cascade down or a drill down. So what is the function? And then what are the jobs and skills required to accomplish that function? So that's number 3. And then capacity or size is a factor. So in finance, okay, I need someone to count on my money, to keep track of things, etc. So what do I need to do that? What are my functions? I need people in accounts payable, people in accounts receivable. I need budgetary people, etc. On capacity, then can I get away with one accounts payable clerk? Or is there so many invoices coming in to be paid that I need 3 accounts payable clerks? So we have to go through that kind of assessment relative to volume. What are the skills I need to fill those jobs? So now we're getting back into human resources management. So what skills does my accounts payable clerk need in order to function? And then we need to get out there and recruit and find people to fill my accounts payable job. And as I said before, we need to attract, retain, and motivate, which are basic HR concepts. So key steps in the redesign process: assess your current model, develop a new model, a new design. We quite often go through several iterations, if you will. So we don't just automatically say, here's number 1, and we would use that conceptual business model that we talked about. We'd identify what's working well in your organization, what's not working well, what are the problems or the symptoms that we want to correct or fix. In step number 2 then, with develop a new design, we say, okay, what are the functions? We would move those building blocks around, as I talked about, into different options and say, well, you could look like this, you could look like that. Here are the advantages and disadvantages of option A. Here are the pros and cons of option B. Let's talk about it. Let's test it. With some clients, they'll just automatically pick the second option if we give them 3. It's very simple. With other clients, we go through multiple stages, multiple iterations. Quite often, we'll give a client 3 levels of a new design. One is with slight change from where they're at today. One is with significant change but realistic in that it responds to addressing the problems, responds to the symptoms that we talked about. And the third one, which is where we have fun, is that we get quite radical or revolutionary, and we say, well, you could do something completely different. You could get rid of your silos and put your accounting people, embed them with the operations people, which may or may not work. Sometimes the clients, we find they like the radical, or what happens more frequently is that there are elements that we never thought of until we decided to think outside the box. When we did the radical design, there are elements there that are actually quite helpful in the more realistic second option. Third, we're back into assessing talent, back to the HR side. If you think about it, we're designing an organization structure, redesigning it on paper. At some point in time, then we have to get real, because unless this is a brand new startup organization, which it wouldn't be because we're redesigning, we need to look at the people. So we call this people mapping. We overlay the new theoretical desired organization structure onto the current level of people and see what fits. I view it as a bit of a game of musical chairs, and it usually doesn't fit. So there's some change involved. There may be new functions or new jobs that we created that no one in the organization has the skill set to do, and so we need to recruit for those jobs. At the other end of the spectrum, there may be people who no longer fit in the organization. Their skills just aren't necessary anymore. So then we're into outplacement for them. There may be people in the middle whose jobs are changing a little bit. So there may be some training involved. And there may be a lot of people who are just continuing to do the same job. But we need to map all of that out, which is why we call it people mapping. And then, quite often, something that happens here is the organization says, "Oh, that's great, Tim. We've got this organization structure that we designed on paper, and you've mapped the people, and we know where we're at." However, Joe Blow over here is an expert in our integrated custom designed computer systems, and he's the only person in the company that knows about these things. And I realize that Joe Blow does not fit into this nice new structure that we've created. However, we need Joe. So we have to do a minor adjustment, a redesign of the redesign, if you will, to fit Joe back in. We probably end up doing that about a third of the time, creating a job or a function for existing valuable people. But that's making the whole process realistic. We're not just arbitrarily saying, take this model and implement it. No, we're saying, let's map the people on, do this talent assessment, as I talked about, and then adjust it for reality. And being very real here is quite important. And then, okay, that's great. How do we get there? So we've got all this laid out. We've got a job for Joe, etc. What are all the steps required? Who does what when? To make this happen. Who's accountable for this? What are the dates, etc.? There's no point in doing all of this redesign if you can't effectively implement it and to deal with management of change. Because people aren't going to like the change, etc. How do we address that? So let's look at this in a bit more detail. We have assessed the current model. So who are your consumers, your customers? What markets and segments do you serve? What needs do these do you fill, etc.? So essentially, what business are you in? How are you currently designed? So we're going to walk through these steps in a bit more detail. It's important that we understand what's involved here and what are all the different aspects are. So in assessing the current model, what are the strengths and weaknesses of your current organization? I mentioned that in our business, we gather data and we do it through two sources, paper and people. So we learn. So paper is written documents, websites, etc. And people we get that information through interviews and sometimes focus groups with staff members. So what is the current strategy? What are some of the challenges? What are the cycle times? So how long does it take to process that invoice or that staffing action, for example? So basically what's going on, etc. Capacity assessment is volume of work. Do you have enough people? Do you have too many people? Too few people? Or is there a mismatch, if you will, where some people are busy half the year and the other people are busy the other half of the year? How does that match up? So it's all part of our assessment. We want to establish our design criteria, as we mentioned. So what are the key aspects that we want our new organization to look like at the end of the day? We then get into to step 2 here, developing the new design. So we generate recommendations. We focus on the key areas where changes need to be made in the organization. We come up with initial designs. That should probably be a plural here, more than one, and assess them against the design criteria. Do they match those criteria? We go through a validation process. So I talked about options earlier on. So I had my simple options, my realistic options, and my radical ones. So we can't just come up with those as consultants. We need to validate them with your executive team. So that they're very real and everyone understands. So usually there's a lot of feedback from the executive team at this stage. And we adjust accordingly. Sometimes there's some adjustments required. Sometimes there's a significant amount of adjustments required as we get this new suit, if you will, to fit properly. So it's a tailoring exercise. So that's on the paper. Then, as I mentioned, we do our people mapping. So we identify the key functions and jobs required to achieve the organization as part of the design. We then get into identifying specific jobs and in what department, etc., into identifying what are the skills, knowledge, and competencies required for each function. And then we look at the current talent that exists in the organization. In the third step here, we would assess the current talent. Sometimes we don't necessarily go through a whole a detailed assessment process. We could, but it's time-consuming. At some point in time, there's a point to which you're going down a road that's just costing too money for minimal value here. So again, we have to decide what is appropriate here. But if managers, through performance appraisals over time, have a full understanding of, and you're tracking skills in a skills database, so we know what are the skills of this person, what is their performance, etc. That's data that's already existing. And we can look at that. So what are the gaps in the talent we need? I mentioned, are the jobs that we don't have skills for that we need to recruit for? Are the people that need to be outplaced because they no longer fit? So what is that balance? And our action plan in terms of planning the transformation, we use 4 R's. What people are we going to retain? What people are going to redeploy into different functions or positions, what people need retraining, and what people or skills need replacing or need to be added. So planning the transformation, essentially what's going to happen when and who's going to do it. Who's accountable to do that? We put in place a risk management plan. So what happens if things are going to go wrong? And things always go wrong. So we need a risk management to say, okay, if this goes wrong, what are we going to do? When is it going to be identified? Hopefully we're identifying problems sooner than later. And we know how to address them. We may not know the details of it yet, because quite often these things are a surprise. But we know how we're going to address it. Lewin is an organization design specialist who has a model which is quite complex, but it can be summarized very simply as unfreeze, change, and freeze. If we think of organization structure as an ice cube, and I want to change this ice cube, well, I could do ice carving, if you will, and get my chainsaw out and change this ice cube from something square to something round, or a different shape, etc. That's quite painful to start chopping away with my chainsaw. But if you think about it, if I melt the ice cube and then put it in this new form, this structure, if you will, of my round new organization, and I freeze it again, I now have a new organization structure that is frozen solid, but in the new way that I want it to look like. So how do we apply that to an organization? This is where change management comes in. You can't come in and simply change an organization. There has to be the catalyst for change that we talked about. The organization has to be ready, so there's a planning process, an exercise to go through in terms of telling people that, hey, especially if you're engaging outside people, consultants, hey, these folks are coming in, here's what they're going to do, here's what they're not going to do. We're not, hatchet men, if you will. We're here to help the organization. Here's the process, so you're communicating with people, with your staff, so they know what's going on. And you're gradually melting the organization so it's ready for change. Once we've gone through that change exercise, as we've talked about, we can then refreeze it, which is back into the implementation plan. It's settling down and with job descriptions and with people in their new jobs. It's dealing with things that that will always come up in reality. So we thought it all had planned, but then remember Joe, he didn't fit, so we have to adjust the organization structure for that. People are going to have to get used to new reporting relationships. People may be in different offices. Your business processes might be different in terms of the work that lands on my desk. Well, where does it come from? It used to come from these people, now it comes from those people. And the work that I'm doing, once I've done whatever it is I'm doing, where does it go? Maybe that's changed as well. So everything, people have to sort of settle into this new suit and this new pair of shoes and get used to it. And gradually then we've refrozen the organization and things can carry along because now you have an organization structure that is more properly aligned, remember my A word, to your business goals. So part of that refreezing includes reducing resistance to change or addressing resistance to change. So people say, well, all this is great, but I don't want to play ball. I want to do this. I like the way I used to do things. I like my desk. I don't want to play with you. So this is part of unfreezing. You need to create a change imperative that, okay, hey, we have to do this. It involves, do I say this here? It involves senior management support is crucial. Quite often you'll need a champion, someone that is going to say, okay, we've gone through this change exercise, we're implementing it, things are going to be differently, all the things I talked about are going to be different. This has to happen. So in some cases, we've seen executives go through this organization structure, redesign, and find that a few senior managers are not playing ball. They've gone through some of these things, which we've talked about. At the end of the day, someone still doesn't want to play ball. Then we've seen the organization say, you know what, it's either this way or we have to terminate you. But so sometimes at the end of the day, that's what you have to do. Ideally, you're not. You're explaining to people, hey, here's why you're changing. And explain this in the context of the individual. So I'm sitting there and say, okay, this big reorg went on and I understand what's happening, etc. But I don't know what it means to me and my paper here and my process and who I talk to, etc. If you can explain it to me in my terms, in my context, which is all part of our transformation plan, then yes, I'm going to understand it, and yes, I'm going to get used to the change, etc. over time, and yes, I'm going to go along, and then things get implemented. Other things to consider, where possible, involve staff in determining what changes should be. Just don't impose it by senior management. Be very honest with people. If you explain what's going to change and why and what it means to them and be totally honest. If you don't know something, then say, hey, we don't know this yet. We see that quite often. Management will say, no, we don't want to communicate with people. We don't want to have a newsletter or regular forums because we don't know the answer. And our response is, then say you don't know the answer. Tell them what you do know and then tell them what you don't know and when you think you will know. Okay, but be honest. So get people involved, grieve for losses if there are people let go, things that are significantly changed that may not be necessarily positive in the short term, then go through that grievance process, but celebrate the achievements. And at the end of the day, declare victory, and we've done this. And throughout all of your transformation process, communicate. Always tell people what's going on. We've gone into organizations where we're consultants and we've been given a desk and we're sitting there and we're interviewing people and we've told the client, okay, you need a memo to go out and say, okay, we're going through this redesign process. These people are coming in from outside to help us to go through this review so they know what's going on. And they say, oh, we don't want to communicate. We don't want to tell them. In the meantime, the employees are looking at us going, well, who are these suits walking around talking to people? Like, why are they here? If you don't tell people what's going on, then it's human nature. They're going to assume the worst. So, as I said, communicate. To recap then, in terms of an implementation plan and the overall process, we've reviewed your current model. We've developed a new design. We've gone through those steps. We've done the people mapping exercise in step 3. We've planned our transformation. We've addressed the management of change issues, and we are now ready to go. So at the end of the day, you have an organization structure that fits your business plan, your priorities, etc. Your functions are fully aligned with your business priorities, and you're ready to go. Thank you very much.